patience as the meeting kind of went a little bit longer. All right, the public meeting of the Board of Education for October 17th, 2023 is called to order. All items being considered this evening are posted on the PPS website under the board and meeting tabs. This meeting is being streamed live on PPS TV services website and on channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. Once again, good evening again. Tonight we'll be receiving 2 updates from staff, one on the fund for PPS and the other one on the implementation of the Equity Action Plan. First, we'll start with our consent agenda. The board will vote on the consent agenda. Members, if there are any items you would like to pull for discussion, we will set those aside for the next time we meet, which will go to a regular agenda item. Ms. Bradshaw, are there any changes to the consent agenda?
No.
Board members, are there any items you'd like to pull? Do I have a motion and a second to adopt this?
Second.
All right.
Sorry.
You get it.
Beat you to it. Actually, I had just a.
Director to pass. Motions. Director Green. Second. Any discussion?
I just have a quick question on the PCC. Are those courses for Jefferson or are those all district students? If nobody has the answer here, I can get it.
I was curious also because it didn't specify.
I want to say Jefferson, but I want to make sure I can find it.
So somebody could just send it, I guess.
We'll
to everybody.
let you know.
Great, thanks.
Any other discussion? All right, the board will now vote on resolution 6780 through 6781. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All opposed? Student Director Silverstein?
Yes.
All right. No abstentions. The consent agenda is approved by a vote of 7-0, with Student Director Silverstein unofficially voting yes. All right. Update on the next agenda item is the update on the fund for PPS. Our first update tonight is the fund for PPS. Superintendent Guerrero, would you please introduce this resolution?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, directors. This is the first of 2 updates this evening. We're focused on the fund for PPS. For folks who may not remember, the fund was established in 2019. A nonprofit organization intended to support the district's goals through fundraising for our district. Tonight we have a couple folks that are going to be providing the board an update. First, Victoria Lara, who you probably recognize. She serves as our chair of the fund for the PPS board. She's also the founder and CEO of Lara Media Services. This is her day job. And Jonathan Garcia, you know him as our chief of staff, is his day job, but he also serves as the president of the fund. So between the 2 of them, they're going to walk you through a presentation.
Thank you, Superintendent. So I also have Robin Ferrone here, who's our Director of Strategic Partnerships at PPS. So I'll turn it over to Victoria to get us started.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Superintendent. Hello, board members and Superintendent Guerrero. Thank you for having me tonight. I am Victoria Lara, and I'm chair of the board of the fund of the Portland Public Schools. As you know, the fund was launched in 2019 to rally the Portland community and business to support expanding opportunities for our kids, helping the PPS vision to create vibrant environments that will help to demonstrate excellence. Our kids are our present and they are our future, our hope. It has been an honor to work on this board, especially through the pandemic, and to help our successful campaign to raise direct support for families in need. Jonathan will share a brief overview of the fund, and thank you for all the work you do on behalf of the students.
Victoria. So, as Victoria alluded to, there are a number of priorities that the Fund for PPS is focused on. But in the aggregate, or the main focus is to nurture the whole child. Right, we are in service of Portland Public Schools, the Fund for PPSs, to ensure that our students experience health, joy, self-expression, curiosity, and learning. And we're doing that in a number of ways. I will highlight 4 major initiatives that the Fund for PPS is focused on raising money for. The first one is Healing Center Schools. We know that our students continue to need mental health and behavioral health supports. And so we are working with the Office of Student Support Services to really lean into how do we create schools that are not necessarily focused on trauma-informed practices, but healing-centered practices, which is a shift not only for the district, but one that philanthropy in our conversations have been very keenly interested in that shift, right? Because again, especially coming out of the pandemic, we need to focus on how do we heal and not how we continue to focus on the trauma. As Victoria alluded to or named, we were founded at the end of 2019, and in early 2020, the pandemic hit. So our shift became about raising monies for what we consider the crisis relief. That effort of crisis relief continues now, and we continue to support parents and families who need services. Services like, I don't have enough money for rent, I don't have enough money for gas or electricity. Our team works closely with our social workers across our schools, and who are the ones that are on the ground, if you will, working directly with families. We are also focused on arts education and enrichment, and I think that's a really important opportunity for not only us but funders to get excited, right, about participating in partnership with PPS. I will note this last year, the Heart of Portland was funded by the Fund for PPS, supported by many of the sponsors that we brought to the table. And the last one that we are focused on is the Inspired Sustainable Schoolyards. This is in alignment with our response to the climate crisis here at PPS. And so we're focused on, how do we make sure that our children have green, sustainable yards that they can play with. You all know that there's a lot of pavement out there, and we need to begin to shift that. And obviously the board policy calls for that, and our fundraising efforts include that. There are other areas, whether supporting the Center for Black Student Excellence, affinity groups, career exploration, and generally just innovation in the school district. What I'm excited about the fund, what the fund brings is private dollars to be able to innovate, right? These are dollars that we can use to support things that districts don't necessarily always have the money or the supports to do. So what has been our impact? And we have our annual report. Did we get handed out?
We have it.
It's in the, I was just gonna say,
Oh.
it's in here.
I think, do we have?
We put it in the board book.
It's on my desk, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
And back here it says.
So we have hard copies for
Oh,
you,
great.
and you also got the annual report. But in terms of our impact, just there are many ways to talk about the impact, but I really want to lift up a couple big voices. One is from one of our social workers. What's powerful about working with our social workers is many times what we heard is, look, I meet with parents all the time or students, but I don't know what resources to provide. So they tell me, hey, the electricity or blah, blah, but what can I do as a social worker? I don't have those resources. Fortunately, again, in partnership with us, we are able to make support our families in that. Our visual and performing arts, again, another example of our impact. We supported in the development of the Master Arts Education Plan, being able to bring in funders to help design that with our teachers. And then our climate justice effort. We continue to provide students many opportunities to get involved in the response to the climate crisis. And again, these funds that are secured through philanthropic gifts support these efforts. Now, there are two aspects to the fund for PPS. There is the local school foundations and the PPS Parent Awards. As you know, you're all having active conversations about the future of local school foundations and PPS Parent Awards. However, I wanted to make sure to provide you a snapshot of the dollars that have been raised and the amounts that are being granted via the PPS Parent Awards. And I think it's important to know that every dollar that is raised in local school foundations and given to the Parent Fund Awards, none of that helps the operation expenses for PPS. These dollars 100% go to schools.
So Jonathan, back on that other slide, can I just ask? So if the equity or the Parent Fund Awards, there's 62 schools, the other funds that buy PPS positions, how many schools is that impacting?
How many schools are 30?
Oh, there's 22 active foundations this year. And it might have been a few more that year.
And so those, I'm just trying to understand it, so the independent foundations are the ones that they send just their 30% to,
They send their full check plus 30%.
and that's the 960.
Correct.
And how many schools is that?
That's 8.
Okay, can you say that again? So
Yeah.
they said, so this is the,
So independent foundations are 8 foundations that are nonprofit. They have their own
Non-affiliated.
independent nonprofit status.
okay,
So they operate independently.
okay,
Those 8 raise, in fiscal year 23, $960,000.
okay. And then, but of those funds raised, they can keep 10,000 and
They keep 33%.
they keep.
No, sorry, 66%.
66, okay, so it's 30%, 33% off the top,
Except for the first 10,000.
minus the 10,000, okay, thank you.
Okay, and then how many affiliated foundations are there?
There's 22 this year. There may have been 25 represented or something in 2023.
So there were 30 schools that got 2.5, that have 2.5 million,
Mm-hmm.
and 62 schools that got, collectively, they got 1.1.
Right.
It's our,
Yes.
and some schools that have foundations, not very many, but there is like a Venn diagram where there are some schools that get, okay.
Some schools that do raise money and also get parent funds. So
Yeah, maybe a handful.
And so the next slide here is the fund's financials. I want to note that you in your package you also got 2 documents here. One is called Candid 2023 Seals of Transparency Guide, and this one just has the name of the fund for PPS. So GuideStar is a reputable organization that helps nonprofits be transparent about their financials and other major issues, so 990s, etc. So this document is available online and it's provided to you. I'm proud to say that the fund for PPS is at the top, meaning platinum transparency. And so you can read through, what that means there. The fund, accepts gifts of any size from individual donors, corporate gifts and business sponsorships, philanthropy, and in-kind gifts. And here you can see those sources of revenue for the last 2 years.
Can you go back to that one?
Sure.
So this 377,000, that's what was raised outside of the foundation funding.
Correct. You want to close it out?
And what was the expenses for that? When we brought in 377, what was the expenses that was paid out?
Yeah, great question. If you look at our annual report, on page 10, you can see those expenses there.
So total expenses of 371.
Yep.
Yeah, 371,000. Now, is that what was? Cause this says program. Fee.
Yep.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I'll define these three, and Robin, correct me if I'm wrong at any point. Program is dollars that were sent directly to PPS to support student program. So those are things that support, like the Heart of Portland, that supports students or families that are needing, do that crisis response. So anything that is, a gift to the district or a gift to families. Management, as you all know, we have the Fund for PPS has an agreement with PPS where PPS reimburses some of my time, some of Robin's time. So that is what is reflected there. So those $57,000 are actually going back to the district as well. So the $12,000 that are left are fundraising. This is paid for our fundraiser
Accounting software.
and accounting software.
Operations.
So it's the very small operations that the Fund for PPS uses. So I'm proud to say, I think 99% of every dollar goes back to PPS or students in some way.
Confused a little bit. I was trying to get the total amount, so, and there's not, I don't see page numbers on these, but if you go back to the slide that has the two charts, yeah, that one. So is it the 2.5 and the 1.1? That's all money coming into the fund? No, I'm sorry. It's just the 2.5.
And so in fiscal year 23, let's look at fiscal year 23. So the 2.5 million plus the 1.1 from the parent fund, all that comes into the Fund for PPS.
Looking for the basic balance sheet, so this has it in, so the parent. Is the upper numbers, that's money that is coming into the fund, and then the 1.1 is going out, or is it 3.6 million coming in? How, I'm trying to figure out what
Sure.
your total budget is, because on the next page you have the 377,000.
So
What is the total amount that comes in?
So all of these monies come into the fund, and then they're mostly, it all comes into PPS, and then it's in their finance accounts. Some of them, they're paid directly to like alternative schools, like the PPS Parent Fund Awards might be paid directly. But so basically, all of this is in and then out.
Okay, when you say all of this, are you talking about the beginning, the top piece?
All of these dollars come in through the fund and come back into
Yeah.
The Parent Fund Awards, those aren't coming in from the 62 schools, they're going out to the 62 schools.
No, but they come in, they get raised from this group.
Well, that's what I'm asking, is the 2.5 the total?
2.5, no, this is 2/3.
No, but is that the total that comes,
The total that comes in is 3.6. And 1/3 of that gets sent out to the Parent Fund Awards, and 2/3 gets,
okay, so 3.6 is the total, well, actually it's
yeah,
about 4 million, including the second
correct.
page, it's about 4 million. And then 2.5 of that goes to the schools that have foundations, which are about 30. And then 1.1 million of it goes to 62 other schools. We'll have it right.
Okay. Well, that concludes our presentation to the board. And we would like to thank all the donors and volunteers who support our kids at PPS. And the Fund for PPS is working to unify philanthropy supporting PPS students. We know it's a big responsibility, it's a lot of work, but serving is our honor and our pleasure.
I had a couple more questions.
Sure.
So what are, when we're talking about health funding piece and the purpose for the fund, what are some of the things we're looking to do to increase donations in? That's what my main
Yeah, that's a
question
great
is.
question. Chair Hollins. I would say, I will acknowledge that, so prior to coming to the district, my job was fundraising at a school district in San Francisco. And so I know the power of philanthropy and the impact that it can have. We, unfortunately, in 2019, when we launched it, had, I would say, big aspirations. And the pandemic really took an impact. So we shifted, again, focused on the crisis response. And since then, I think it's been a year and a half, 2 years, we've been trying to find different ways to engage philanthropy differently. Spring, we hosted our first, fundraiser event, which I thought was really successful for our first one. Thank you to all the philanthropists that supported. I think we want to continue that, and as you alluded to last year, I think we can do a big one. I think that's definitely the goal. Number two is we acknowledge that our board of the Fund for PPS, again, appreciate Victoria's leadership, can grow. And so we're actively engaging with a numerous number of potential board members that include C-suite executives from some of the major companies and organizations in the city of Portland. We know that that's an avenue to engage philanthropically. Ultimately, I think the question for our community is how much should they invest in PPS and in the fund, right? And I think part of the challenge right now is that political discourse that's happening about the future of fundraising. So once that stabilizes, I believe that once we have a clear future about the fundraising at PPS, I think then we could help donors, really find their niche in fundraising in giving to PPS. And that, because what I don't want to do is tell anyone. I mean, obviously as a fundraiser, your job is to move people in a certain direction. But I also recognize that being part of a school system, the world is your oyster in terms of what you want to invest in, right? Athletics, arts, the list can go on and on. So how do we help find that niche for those donors?
I have a question kind of on those lines. If what's the long game? What would be an ultimate, success story, let's say in 3 years? And where do you see the biggest gaps in service, or what are we solving for, I guess, with this fund?
Yeah, that's a great
It's
question.
kind of obvious, but not to me.
Yeah, I'll start with your last question first. I think the focus of the fund, just like a lot of fundraising organizations that support districts, they're really they sit well in that space of innovation, right? That place where the district's leadership, district staff have ideas that they want to try. What we know is that, when you try things with public dollars, there's a lot of scrutiny.
Yes.
Right? And so I think the beauty of private investments is that, that we can play around. We can get a little dirty, with some of that. I'll use one of our,
fail forward.
or fail forward, right? I'll use one of our examples, which is the PGE investment that we got, right? PGE came to us, or not to us, we came to an agreement where they invested in our efforts around climate justice.
Yeah.
Now, this was before the climate crisis response policy that you passed. And so they went on they took a big leap to say, we want to support this, because they were really excited about the idea of developing a curriculum that was focused on the climate response. And so, that allowed a little bit of flexibility, right? We were able to bring teachers to help create that curriculum. They partnered with executives and other folks from PGE. And, I just remember the story of PGE has a bird watcher of some sort of position.
Yeah.
And they came out and they, talked about their role and the importance of being in there and how that role, the impact of climate justice. So I think those are the types of opportunities that that the fund really creates. Your first question was about long term.
Mhm.
Again, I think the reality is that the last few years have been rough for the fund in the sense that it hasn't been able to really define its voice, right? The Fund for PPS is still in some ways competing, and I don't say that in a negative way, competing with organizations like All Hands Raise, right? And so, especially with philanthropy, right? Why should I invest in the fund versus if I'm already investing in All Hands Raise? And so for us, it's a matter of telling the right story, right? And so I think over the last few months, our team has been really working on trying to write that story and tell us and have that story speak to who we want, what we want to create, which is our dollars are going to support the children of Portland Public Schools.
I think the PGE example is excellent because I know they're also, in addition to developing the K-12 curriculum for climate justice, they also have some of their giving is going towards CTE and developing careers that start at high school level, 2-year associate's degree, 4-year degree, and et cetera. So I'm not sure if any of those funds are being deployed to help high school students engage in STEM fields.
I believe.
But I know that that PGE is investing in the future that way.
Director Scott had a question.
I had similar questions to what you guys had, but I won't make you repeat the same answer again. But maybe putting it in a little bit broader context, and we had some of these conversations last year when I was the liaison, the fund is, for me, the future of the fund goes hand in hand with anything we're doing around foundation policy reform. And I'm really interested in knowing what other districts have successfully done. So you mentioned San Francisco, but I'd be interested in just, if I think it's pretty easy, if a staff person could pull out, what are 5 of the 10 most successful sort of philanthropic efforts going on in larger urban districts, and what are their risks? Because I think that helps us understand the possibilities, and then really saying, what does it take to get the Fund for PPS to that point? Because again, for me, I would like to see some changes in our foundation policy, but I'm not willing to support those changes without transferring some of that, to the Fund for PBS. So really exploring that question, what does that take? And is that just the board saying, we'll allocate, some money for additional fundraisers, for additional growth, for additional capacity? Is there more to it than that? I know Portland is notoriously difficult around philanthropy, because even though we got a couple big corporations, it's not like San Francisco, it's not like New York, it's not even like
Seattle.
North Carolina, right?
Microsoft.
So anyway, I'll put that out there as that's my frame as I sort of look at these policy issues.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great examples where districts have an education foundation working in partnership with them. They serve purposes, they're rallying community stakeholders, business community, philanthropy, and really they're supporting sort of the edge of district transformation in most cases, right? In our past district, yes, we had the benefit of folks in the technology industry who understood what we were trying to do with the school district, so they did things like fund our middle school redesign, redo our playgrounds, cafeterias, internships at tech companies, launch new CTE programs and video game design. Like, there was a lot of excitement for coming in to innovate with the school district that created opened up an avenue that then we could figure out, give us some time to sustain and scale out. And so, you know, it was a really powerful mechanism. You know, I could give you examples. Like my prior district before that, the Boston Center for Excellence, had a very heavy academic policy-oriented sort of focus, and you know, worked hand in hand with the district over a decade in pushing that district's literacy practices, for instance, making it one of the best examples around. So, you know, there are a lot of examples. You know, there's a lot of potential in the fund. It sort of we can galvanize around what are the areas, you know, that we can prioritize and support the fund's growth, you know, by tapping into many of the networks in the broader community or that you may know.
So one of the folks that we are, I mean, I can't name them yet because we're still working through some stuff, but someone that's agreed to join the board is an executive from the Portland Chamber, right? And so with a real deep access to that business network, and part of that conversation with them was how does the Portland Business Alliance and PPS, or the Fund for PPS, partner or work more coherently to think about those strategic investments. Because the reality is, you know, we have a lot of folks that do give to PPS in a variety of ways. It is the power of unifying those dollars to make the biggest impact that we're trying to get to.
Have we engaged with any community development financial institutions in the city?
Yeah. Do you have a suggestion?
Yeah, I have several.
I'll follow.
I have a question, two questions. So if looking at the 4 million, the 2/3 of the benefit go to the schools with the higher incomes. And then looks like about 1/3 go to the lower income schools. And I'm curious if you've done like any future planning about what would it take to, instead of giving 5,000 to 15,000 to the schools that are getting the equity grants, but are our lowest income schools, generally and serving mostly more students of color. What would that take for the fund to do that? What amount?
I think we focused more on initiatives like that to like galvanize the donor, because I think sometimes when you talk about the amounts for schools, like the business community feels like that should come from their taxes, from state funding. So it's been more about like what will enhance the experience of students and ensure that we're prioritizing with the racial equity and social justice lens what those initiatives are, how that's going to impact.
I guess I'm looking at it from the sort of policymaker or the student or school experience of the schools that are getting less money is like what I'm just like interested in what would that look like to try and close that gap so that all schools are getting from the fund, which hopefully that would be, I mean, there's a way to express that to donors in a way that is compelling, but I would be interested like what sort of planning is happening around that, or is that being left to the school district? So that'd be one question I have. So what's the size of that gap? And then the second is, and this is just going back to so the founding of the fund. I was on the board when it got transferred from All Hands Raised, which before that was Portland Schools Foundation. And the two most critical things the Portland Schools Foundation did for PPS and our students was, one, they were the gathering place for thousands of parents. So they put tens of thousands of parents in the streets in the wake of Measure 5. So they were really the place where people went if you wanted to like support PPS. That's where you went. And the second thing was they were always played a leadership role anytime we had some external money asked, whether it was the Coalition for School Funding now to get to up the state school fund, or the local income tax surcharge of Multnomah County, or the first local options, which translated into actually, you know, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. And since it got transferred, that hasn't happened. And I guess the question is, do you envision that being something that the fund, a role for the fund, or should there be a separate entity that's created that does that?
Yeah,
Because it's like a missing piece in the larger community, and I had lots of conversations with Dan Ryan, and he transitioned the fund to All Hands Raised, and it had they helped a lot less. But it's like, hey, there's gonna be a vacuum because this is a huge role that the school's foundation played. So I'm curious about your thinking about in the strategic thinking of and planning, if that's a role for the fund, or should some other entity be set up that does that more sort of like grassroots advocacy, support for all the money measures, because it's missing right now.
Sure. So absolutely, I do agree that the fund's role has been largely silent on advocacy and investments in things like the option levy or the bond. We did in its early, I think in 2019 gave a $5,000 investment when we were starting off. And I do think that the fund for PPS should have will have a third leg of its stool, which is this advocacy component. I wouldn't call it advocacy in the way that maybe you're describing it, as much as a vessel for investments. So being able to support local option levies or support the bond, because we know that it takes money to get more money, and so I do believe that the fund for PPS will play a role there. And in fact, I think the reason it plays a role is, we are all asking the same people for money, right? So when we go out for a bond, we're asking PGE for money for that, while we're asking them for an investment in programming. And so how do we unify those asks, right, in a way that builds a better experience for the donor? And so I look forward to partnering with the board to really understand how we might do that.
Yeah, 'cause just like you said, you're competing with All Hands Raised. It used to be people could give money to and people give a lot of money to the Portland Schools Foundation because the board was pretty big and diverse, so it covered a lot of territory. But people knew if they gave there, it's sort of like it was a twofer. They were helping the foundation, but then also the foundation was like usually the largest donor in any of the campaigns, which then allowed people to, like, they gave once. It wasn't, because what I'm finding now is people like, oh, I already gave money to All Hands Raised or something else when you're raising money for our local options or our bonds. So having a more coordinated approach, because at the end of the day, being able to leverage the power of that, it's been a missing piece.
Absolutely.
There's certainly the potential for the fund to play convener, catalyst, organizer, on those priorities that the board identifies. And primarily, hopefully the fund is functioning to advance a strategic plan to the next level. So to answer also your first question, because I don't see the fund as necessarily the mechanism by which to sustain school funding, for example. We are grateful for the give that people make in our communities, and we have said from the very get-go, we're gonna have an equity-centered resource allocation model. So, we're appreciative that schools can raise quite a bit of money actually, but we're also almost double funding and allocating additional staff to our most underserved communities. So, we try to make sure they have capacity in that way too. The question is, what role can the fund play in supporting all of our school communities, provide an improved school experience for every one of our kids?
Sorry, did you say that you don't see the fund's role as helping sustain funding with PPS?
Sort of speaking to sort of our role as the school system to make sure that every school has adequate funding to provide core educational programming.
So I'm just, and I don't know the business model that you guys have or just using. I just wonder if when I see this, and I'm assuming this is everyone who's working there as well, right? Are you looking at like, expanding or hiring like someone to actually go out and do fundraising, someone that's in the community who has the connections to go out and find things? Because I'm gonna push back a little bit with Director Scott said is, I don't necessarily think this is contingent on the foundation policy stuff. 'Cause I believe if the fund was doing the stuff, or raising the funds that and I feel it could raise easily, there would be no foundation conversation. Right, I think that the fund could be able to do what we need to do on a regular basis. So I just wondered about the business model that you guys are using, the strategy you guys are using to really look into that.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of money out there. From arts to to education, like there's a lot of money out there. So I think it's just a matter of strategizing to how we get there, and maybe it's hiring some folks to go out there and do that, or something like that. Right?
Yeah,
I think it has great potential.
absolutely. And I think, I think it's important to, I agree 100% with your comments. The fund for PPS, sits in the Office of Strategic Partnerships, which raises more money than what you see here. So I think that's kind of an important note. We get money from we get money from competitive government grants.
You talking about the fund for PPS, or are you talking about PPS?
PPS. So here's what the fund for PPS I think plays a very unique role in engaging a business and philanthropy community who doesn't want to invest in government institutions. So we have a number of folks that said, no, I'm fine with donating to Portland Public Schools, and then we facilitate that process. A lot of folks philanthropy feel much cleaner to put it on, or much they're at ease with it on the fund side because it's a nonprofit. It has, we have certain requirements in terms of what we have to submit or make available. We have contemplated as the board, what does the future look like in terms of hiring staff? So right now the fund does not have any official staff on its payroll, if you will. It's all managed here, right, by this team, and we reimburse the district, right? So that's what you see there.
Yeah.
So on the partnership side, we are hiring. We managed their position to make it more of a public-facing or community-facing fundraising position. That their job is to, walk the line and ask for those money. So we are bringing that position to see what type of impact it can have.
Any other questions?
This is just like more housekeeping, but I was looking at the list of your board members and then what was online, and they're different. Who are the current board members?
What's online is our current board.
Okay. And then I was looking at your bylaws, and it looked like you had from the fund, just from what was applied, that there was an audit done. Is that like an annual audit done? And the result is an audit, or is it the filling out of the Form 990?
No, we do an audit every other year.
We do a full audit every 3 years, so we're doing our second audit is in process right now, and in the off years, we do a financial review with McDonald Jacobs, a third-party accounting firm.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda is the Equity Action Plan implementation. We're here to update on the implementation of the Equity Action Plan. Superintendent, could you please introduce this next item?
Yes, you might recall that in 21-22 there was an equity audit, and we've had a number of audits in different areas. We're gonna have specifically Chief of Schools, Dr. John Franco, report out on an aspect of the audit that has been ongoing work and let you know how that's going.
Yeah, sounds great. I don't know if there's. Okay. So I'm happy to, directors, talk to you about, some of the steps that we have, which have been substantial taken in reference to the equity audit and just like with what Superintendent mentioned. So this equity audit took place in 21-22 via survey, but then more so via focus group with administrators of color. Specifically building leaders. So some of the themes that emerged were through conversations within those focus groups of building leaders. I will say that when you're talking about administrators of color, it's also beyond the building leader, and we're making sure that when we're talking about supports, it also it includes program administrators. It also includes myself. Right? It also includes SLT. It also includes those types of things. So there are going to be specific things that you'll see in terms of actions, absolutely centered around building leaders of color, but then you'll also see some pieces like affinity spaces that we hold for everybody, which I think is extremely important. So, and I will say this before we get to the slides, is that the supports that you're going to see is really a collective approach, not only with Office of School Performance, Office of Teaching and Learning, Office of Student Support Services, and absolutely on data development. Working collaboratively with building leaders, moving forward to address some of the themes that emerged through the audit.
I asked a couple questions.
Do you have it? You want me to just go?
Yeah, well, I asked a couple questions. So there was a number of themes that they had in the report. Are we focused, have we addressed all the themes, or is it just some of the themes that?
I would say that we focused on all the things.
Great, okay.
And when you'll see the actual steps, you'll see that pieces of the steps, I mean, it really comes down to, like if I were to sum it up into one theme, that our administrators of color often feel a lack of support, not only with feeling like they're not heard, but they also mentioned one of the themes kind of feeling maybe dehumanized is a strong word, but not feeling human-like. There was a big piece there. And then also from a resource perspective and then just a feedback perspective. So where are their voices in decisions that are made? And so if we think about that theme overarchingly, we really collectively earmarked various strategies. I would say not only strategies, but feedback loops. And so you'll hear some of those pieces. So I did send a memo which kind of outlines. Oh, perfect. Can you go to the next slide? So if you take a look here, and I did mention this before, so our administrators of color shared that they are often without the support and resources they need to be successful. So if you were to take the big overarching theme from the few themes, that's really what it came down to. So that includes, and if you
Let's kind of stop, because it seems like you're really minimizing when you say it's overarching, when they had like 9 different things that really
Yes.
was descriptive of some of the way they were feeling. So it's when you, to me, it seemed like when you just kind of do an overarching theme, that you miss a lot of some of the other important things that they had in it. I'm looking at the original report that they.
Yes, so if you actually, so here, and what I meant by this, because I was just trying to organize it into the slide deck, of slides, right? And so the
Why you gotta take out those pictures, because you don't need.
the bullet, so the bullets here are encompass those themes, right? And so if you think about, like, if you were to, I'm not minimizing, but if you were to organize those into a general piece just to get on the slide deck, that's what it would be. So a lack of formal resources that are relevant to leaders of color, as well as limiting the capacity of leaders of color to support each other. I mean, that was a big piece. The invisibility and isolation of people of color, right? That was a piece that they felt. The usefulness of having a mentor of color. variable or limited empowerment and differing acceptance and accountability. Environment unsupportive of people of color, self, and humanity. I talked about that a little. The universal and personal nature of the support provided to leaders within the district. And if you go to the memo, you can see a little bit more descriptors of what those actually mean. Also, can you go to the next slide, Roseanne? So if you look, so also a big common piece, right? Because we're very cognizant of like who's staying and who's going, what's the rationale for that. Next slide. So in the focus groups, a theme that emerged that those who stay, by staying in the district, there are opportunities to be a part of a solution. So the question was, what would keep you here? Whether through exit interviews or through these focus groups. These are things that came about through that focus group. That by staying in the district, there are opportunities to be a part of the solution. So being more involved in decisions. Also sharing their commitment to improving the district and the educational system. And so that came out loud and clear. Is the feeling, the overarching feeling about that there's a shared commitment across the board and that they feel included, right, in decisions. And the second point here is leaving the district. What are some reasons our administrators of color are leaving? The feeling about not feeling valued. Some leaders think of leaving the district because they do not feel appreciated, or they do not feel that they can bring their full authentic self to work, right? And so that emerged through the focus group.
So can you go a little deeper? What do they mean by, or what do you mean by when they say authentic self?
There's a lot of research around code switching. You can't come in as a person of color in a white system and be your authentic self, right? I think that's a struggle for all people of color.
I can explain it. It's that you can't show.
I know what code switching is.
Well, not code switching.
Oh.
It was you asked to clarify, to go deeper about what this non-appreciation looks like, or not being able to be fully authentic. And it said being able to bring your full culture to work. That's my understanding. Whether that's a hairstyle, big earrings.
Absolutely, yeah.
No.
And with that,
Whatever you bring with your culture.
yeah, and with that comes, right, the implicit bias piece that comes into play based on, looks or how you talk, those types of things, right? And so that's what they meant in terms of authentic self. And that's what I meant by code switching, right? You are one way, say, around, we just had an affinity space for all administrators last week, and to see how we were, right, in that affinity space, and one person even said is different, right, than when they're working in the schools to a certain extent.
How was that the first affinity space that they did it, or has this been going on since
This has been going on. So we made an adjustment. So what we've done last year, we did affinity spaces during leadership, which we had monthly. Right, and so that was, for those who don't know, leadership is when we gather all building administrators, principals in general together in central office leadership. So we made the adjustment to not only have that, but then to offer affinity space outside of leadership. And so the affinity space that we offered outside of leadership, the first one occurred last week. And so those will happen at least quarterly in terms of learning reflection and just being in community. And then we'll also mix in some other spaces where we can just be social and just be in community together, right? I think that's an important piece. And I sent you a little bit of feedback, and people just appreciate kind of being in that space, together. It was facilitated by Village Resiliency, and so there's a level of just kind of just coming back to who you are and a level of empowerment. And I think what we heard loud and clear is that even after just that short time of 2 hours, it was just a overarching feeling of just you just feel good, right? You're invigorated, right? You remember why you're in this work, and also that that you're in this collectively together.
And so you mentioned that you did these affinity groups during leadership.
Correct.
Is that something that was always done before too?
No.
So it just happened after this report? came out?
After, yes. Well, there were talks about it happening before, but we really instituted after some feedback from it. And it's, like I said, it's been expanded. We used to do, again, it's my understanding that several years ago, the affinity spaces outside leadership did happen. Centraling on Singleton's Courageous Conversations, kind of using that kind of overarchingly as a model. And so that didn't happen, that happened a long time ago, is my understanding. So we're in a sense kind of bringing that piece back.
Dr. Franco, when we had the original presentation, was that 2 years ago or last?
It was last year.
Yeah, it was last October.
So it was presented more from, not from the top, but more the
Building.
and the people who built the report. So I'm
Correct.
curious, like this presentation, did PAPSA review it or did it have input? I'm just curious because last time we had actually the ones who wrote the report and the recommendations to present.
Yeah, so actually I sent these steps out in the spring of last year, because what we did is we also have building leader focus groups. And so I sent an update of not only things that we did do, but things, this was on the agenda, or these were steps that we were going to take this year. Making sure to address the things that came up, not only through the equity audit, but really things that came up through successful school survey as well. So they have seen these steps. And if they haven't read these, they're feeling it right now.
That's great that something was in it, but I'm just curious, like in response to the equity audit, because there was
So Carmen on PAPSA has seen these. Trying to think who else was there because
like tonight's presentation.
not the presentation, no, but the steps that are listed on here, they've seen those.
And I'm curious in here, like, one of the things the district said it was gonna do is start the strategic plan committee, so I'm just curious, say that they started, so which ones started and like, how many meetings did they have? Because there were some really specific asks from the building leaders
Right.
of color.
Right, so the strategic plan committees are the customer service, strategic alignment, high quality teaching and learning, Black student excellence, inspiring learning spaces, and support for Team PPS. And so from those committees, we gathered principal representation on all those. So at least each committee has at least met once from last year.
So there's been one meeting
So-
since last year.
Since last year, full transparency. So, but the idea is that those will be revamped moving forward to meet obviously more than once from last year.
I'm just curious on the folks that either roll it or participate in this. What are their feelings of if this stuff have been implemented, it's been helpful?
Yeah, so one of the things I would say, so if you were to say like the affinity space, like for example, because we had a few folks who were in the affinity space who just appreciated kind of that piece.
The one that's, you talking about the one last?
The one that we just did. And one of the things that we're going to be doing, because like I mentioned about progress checks, so if you think about the common themes and the school listening sessions, the idea is we will do that again at the end of this year. So we'll have a successful school survey and focus kind of just listening pieces. And in particular for me with the AOC, we're going to set up either a focus group or survey, maybe a combination of both, specific to the themes, right? Because if we're thinking about benchmarks, where we're at progress-wise, we want to be able to report progress on the specific themes that were mentioned.
I'm glad you brought that up because last year when we had the conversation, that was supposed to have been happening already as far as progress monitoring. So from here, what you're saying that we're going to do that now, but then I mean the whole year has lapsed where we haven't had that. And then that actually, am I right?
I would say specific to the themes.
Right. Then we're talking specific to the
Sure.
report.
Specific to the themes in regards to like having a focus group or that type of thing we can do. But using like PAPSA, using the successful school survey. We were very transparent with the successful school survey and that geared us. And then also we also had those building leader sessions those opportunities to provide input and feedback last year. Now, this year,
And those are focused for administrators of color.
Those are focused
about.
the successful schools piece was for all, was for everybody.
So not really focused on administrators of color.
Not specifically.
And so why are we talking about that if this is specifically for administrators of color?
Well,
And you're saying, well, this is for everybody. Well, then that's, again, it's not focused on administrators of color.
and I would say that this is a piece that we're moving forward with this year.
So last year, when we brought this up, I asked the question of why aren't the people that took the survey, that did this audit, why aren't they leading the conversation? Why are we coming back to the table and they are not here to facilitate the conversation around this is how things are going, this is what we're going to be doing, and this is what it's looking like, this is who we're going to be working with. At that time, I believe I asked Jonathan, who were they going to be reporting to? And we didn't have a name to who they were going to be reporting to, because I wanted to find out who's going to be accountable for whether or not this fails or succeeds. And no name was given, but that we were going to be committing to like making sure that this happens specific to equity. The equity audit. I don't care about the successful school survey because that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the equity audit. The equity audit is not the successful school survey. This is very specific to the administrators and the teachers of color specifically. So don't lump us in with everybody else because you make us insignificant. I'm sorry. It is what it is. Don't lump us in with everybody else. This was an equity audit.
Right, but administrators of color are also taking the survey. How are you invalidating their voice when they take that survey?
We were doing an equity audit.
I understand
So,
that.
and the administrators of color, they're taking that as part of a larger group. We're saying as a part of this solely about this. I'm solely wanting to hear about your experience. Like how your dealings at work. How do you feel at work? Where are you solely amongst you? Do we realize that black people are the only people that have to say black and? It's the only ones. Latino Network has their own thing. Pacific Islanders, Asian Americans. When it comes to black people, we have to say black and brown or black and something else. We gotta stop lumping it. Stop lumping it and get us back together.
So I hear you tell a successful survey. I get it, right? Were those questions in the successful survey geared towards people of color like the one in the equity audit was?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
How was your school experience? How's your experience?
Yes.
Is not a.
Cause I'm reading,
How do you ask that
I'm reading the
question differently?
questions. I'm reading some of the questions that was on the equity audit, and I don't know if they lined up with
I will
the
say,
successful school survey. And are those successful school surveys that disaggregated so you can pull out, oh, well, these teachers of color feeling this way during a successful school survey?
Successful school survey is specifically around building leadership. And so from a disaggregation, they can, with any survey, list.
Have you guys done that?
Identify.
Have you done that?
And disaggregation, yeah, absolutely. We've done that piece. And I'll also say this too, and because we
It
can
was
get,
presented to you.
and maybe we can get to some of the action pieces, because back to, so mind you, some of the checks, a lot of the checks that we are doing, and it's a lot of the system pieces, we have built in individual pieces from a check and balance piece. So in other words, we shouldn't have to get together all administrators of color to get a feel for your experiences. So for example, our senior directors of schools, okay, right? Which right now have currently 8 to 12 schools, right, on their caseload, okay? Our principal coaches, who are not senior directors, are also aligned with our OSP department in regards to supporting. We've been very specific about having our, like for example, principal coaches of color. We have two African American principal coaches, and they work specifically, right? Because that was something that was feedback from our black principals, new principals, that they wanted to see that. So we've been very strategic. And so we have weekly meetings, okay, not as an OSP team. And so those themes would absolutely come up during that time, right? Because we talk about these pieces all the time. So I would say it should not and will not, should have to result on surveys or focus groups, that type of thing. There's immediacy of day-to-day types of things that we're doing that can lend us an ear to how we are doing from a system perspective.
But how do we get that if we're not doing progress monitoring? We haven't done progress monitoring. How do we?
That's what I'm saying, is that we are doing the progress.
Oh, we're doing it now.
Well,
Because where is that though?
What's
That's one thing I'm confused, like,
Yeah.
I was looking for, one of the things I was looking for is like, here that recommended actions and then like, I guess data aligned against it of like, where are we trying to get to? And what progress have we?
in reference to the themes like I mentioned, that will be a piece of the grading issue. In reference to the specific themes. But I was trying to talk to, more so to Director Hollins' question about, how do we know if we're not having a focus group survey or that type of thing? Because of the system
It's
piece.
coming through that you want to hear directly from, is your experience different, right?
Yeah.
You recap the themes from 2 years ago. We haven't gotten into the couple slides of all the strategies, activities that have taken place over the last year and a half or two. I'm assuming you've seen what those are. We talked about any one of them. But what you really want to know is it better? You want to hear that. You want to hear some indication of that by gathered feedback from our principals.
Because that's literally in part of theme 7. Feedback falls flat. And that's literally one of the themes that, there's no action taken, there's no feedback given. And I'm asking them, what would they say? Hey, is it getting better for them? I'm asking, because that's the whole point of the audit, so it can get better for them. Is it getting better for them?
I want to see, as we move forward through the year, given the pieces that we've been doing.
Is it getting better for them? And if you can't answer it, I get it, then that's what the answer is. That's what we're trying to get to. Is it getting better? Like Balu said,
It sounds like
is
you
it
want to hear
getting
it
better?
directly from the audience.
Well, it's because he's not answering.
Well, I'm trying to, okay, so
I just need an answer. I don't need politicals. I just need the answer. Hey, is it getting better for the administrators of color?
if I were to answer that question, I'd say yes.
Which is interesting because only one person on this who did this report is still here. And they left for different, and I've talked to most of them. So it's interesting that you say, well, you think it is getting better, but the people who actually did the report, only one of them is still here. And the other ones left for multiple reasons, but a lot of them was because of the stuff that happened in this audit report is still happening.
Because this place is very toxic, yes.
Hey,
For all of us,
I get
for-
that. I
for
get
every
that.
person of color that works
I
here,
get that.
including us.
I get that. Once again, the goal is you say it's getting better, but everybody who started on work on this is not here for reasons associated with the same report. That's a problem.
I don't know necessarily if that's why they're that piece for that group in particular. Okay, so we hired 17 principals this year. Okay, we had to hire 32 last year.
I'm just talking about those groups.
No, I know, but I guess
I've talked to them personally.
well, and again, but if you bring back to the group, if you come back to the group that presented last year, every situation was different in terms of like.
I know. So this is.
So I guess what I'm saying is.
So this is what's interesting to me because I talked to them. So you can't tell me anything that I don't already know why they left. So it's like you're trying to say, well, they didn't know. I literally talked to them. And it goes back to what Jonathan said. Yeah, it's toxic environment. They get report from leadership. I get that. I'm just asking, what are we going to do about it? Because once again, it's been a year, and you can't tell me if it's getting better.
Well, I can tell you, I feel like it's getting better.
And where's the data to back that up?
I have data that
Well,
I'm
we have to
going to show on my screen right now to show you to go back to the successful school survey. But this has African American.
But it has everybody as well.
Yes, it does. It has
So
everybody.
it's
It has
the same
Hispanics.
thing.
Gary, why do we not want to hear what African American people say on the successful schools?
Because I'm just curious if the questions on the
So I would say
was for everybody. It wasn't geared to, hey, do I feel like I have to code switch on the successful school survey?
Director Holland, so
It doesn't talk about, hey, as people of color, when you look at some of these other things, well, we feel like we're getting held accountable to a higher standard than anyone else. Is that addressed on the Successful Schools? Those specific questions.
I think there are specific questions, I agree, that would not necessarily, to say that this is not an indicator in terms of how folks are feeling. So mind you, the equity audit too was done with focus groups, right, of folks. We have currently, if you're talking about building administrators, we have about 68, right, building administrators of color. The focus groups that were done during the equity audit had groups of 4, had groups of 6, had groups of 8. All I'm saying is we use this as well in conjunction. I agree, and that's what I said, that we are going to be more specific with the actual themes and collect data on those specific themes, but we do use this. Like, this is an important piece to gauge on how we are doing with our leaders of color. And then we also, again, use focus groups that we did, which we did have several administrators of color attend last year. Maybe it wasn't necessarily the specific group, but I would say like people like Carmen, folks, I can't remember all in all who was here, but they're also in other sessions of feedback opportunities in regards like PAPSA, like for example, we have several administrators of color on PAPSA from last year. And that is a feedback loop and feedback opportunity. So if you can go back to the slide. So just to highlight some things in terms of actionable pieces that we have done to address the themes. Again, this is in conjunction with all of our departments. So OSP, OTL, OSSS, and absolutely ResJ.
And these things that you're going to present, is this specific to administration,
These are
or is this abroad for everyone?
These are very specific steps, right, that we have taken, which address just an overwhelming feeling of lack of support, right? And those pieces, like the community approach. So I think, so if we go on to the next slide. So our recipe work, if you think big picture, right? Because we're thinking about sustainability. So the development of an equity-centered leader is extremely important. So with Recipe, what we're doing is we're creating leadership standards, principal standards and principal supervisor standards with an equity-centered profile, right? And so with the creation of an equity-centered profile, we can be more specific and strategic with professional development and support. Because these will be the expectations that we'll have for all leaders, right? And then also as we're hiring people into the system, that is also going to help us in terms of what does the onboarding look like.
Can you dive into a little what that equity center profile looks like?
Sure. So I have it, I can send it to you. I just had it pulled up.
If you send it to me, I can share it on screen.
This is the Wallace Foundation funded work. We're working with the
Correct.
2 higher ed institutions so that they are developing a candidate pool of school leaders that actually have a racial equity mindset, that are better equipped to have those leadership domains to serve effectively. In our district, particularly for underserved students, the partnership, I think, is unique in that not only is it with 2 local colleges, but it's also been working with Oregon's TSVC, so professional licensure. And so it's actually altering the overall state system for making sure that the folks that are being granted licensure have some background in some of these topic areas. And so, it's been, really fascinating work for PPS to be leading statewide, where we're trying to meet our own need for a particular profile of school leader. These are the domains.
So you can see, I know it's kind of hard to see.
Maybe a little bit larger font.
Yeah, trying.
So through our recipe work, foundationally, this is what we would call the Oregon leader. This is what our PPS leader profile will be. Right? And so this has been in conjunction with, through our OSP, our PLL department, we have reps from, again, every single department, and we do have obviously building leader voice and particularly building leaders of color who have been immersed and involved in this work, in the creation of this. It's a draft, right? But this will, in a sense, set a foundation as we think big picture, long term.
This is something we're going to implement.
What's that?
This is something we're going to be implementing.
This is something, yeah, this will be a foundation for like the development of principal standards and principal supervisor standards, right? So, and once we socialize this, this can become the foundation for PD.
This hasn't been fully adopted yet.
No, not yet, because we still, this is still.
Is you're asking two university principal preparation programs to completely blow up their programs and reform them to match this type of leadership domain.
So it's a partnership. We have through TSBC, through ODE, through Lewis and Clark, and also through the Portland State. Any questions about this piece?
And you'll hear more about it at the council's fall conference when
There
we
you go.
present on it.
That's right, we'll be presenting.
With the two colleges in Portland.
Yes.
So one thing, just about the successful school survey, I do know that, when Carmen was the, head of PAPSA, that they were instrumental in getting administrative questions on the survey. And I'm wondering whether, to, Dr. Holmes and Green's comment, whether with more specificity, questions
On the survey.
could be asked, because I know they viewed that as a way for them to, like, frankly anonymously provide feedback into the system. But to get another specific data point, and that's not at all a reason to say, I from my perspective, I'd like to see more measurable, like, instead of activities, more measurable, like here, like, I'm not sure what 17 new principals as opposed to 32 means, because it may be, we retained every principal of color, we lost 32 others, so
Yeah, that's true.
for,
And I can
like,
get
understanding of the metrics before like another year goes by to answer the question of whether things are getting better and whether it's directly tied back to the issues that were raised in the initial report.
No, I appreciate that, Director Remembrance. So again, so just if we just go, I don't know if you want to go down this list specifically, or if you just want to read it yourselves, but I just want to highlight a few things on this first slide and then move to the second slide. I think one of the
Dr. DePass has a question.
Thank you. I was, as I was reading through the materials, and trying to understand some of the conditions for administrators of color, one of the things that I know just anecdotally is that the parents in the building make it really hard for principals of color.
Sure.
I mean, they're part of the landscape that make it very difficult. In fact, I hear from parents that say some terrible things about our administrators of color.
Absolutely.
I mean, really bad.
At every level.
At every level. Neighbors, parents, talking really badly about Black principals, for instance. Get that regularly.
Yeah.
Latina principals. And I'm sure that contributes, if you're a building leader and you've got people in your community that aren't supportive, that's got to also contribute to why people would leave. But I didn't see that addressed. So just wanted to bring that to the floor because I know that's got to be problematic.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that direction pass. I just want to highlight just a few of these bullets in terms of support. So our PLL department, Professional Leadership and Learning, within the Office of School Performance, is a huge support.
What was it again?
It's our Professional Leadership and Learning department within our Office of School Performance. So they work, within our PLL department are principal coaches, and those are not senior directors of schools, right? There's a lot of research around senior principal supervisors and principal coaches. So we have been very specific about making sure there's a separation. And so our principal coaches work specifically with our new leaders When I say new leaders, within the first 3 years. And I don't know if you know this, so 62% of our building leaders are within the first 3 years. So they have and are involved in this program. And the principal coaches are tied directly to a senior director of schools cohort. And so they are asked to participate in, and you can see it here, in professional leadership and learning, in new leader induction or new principal induction, which we have quarterly meetings within PLL. We're also launching an inspiring leadership program as well, in the future principals program. But those leadership induction pieces have been big supports for our leaders, for all our leaders. From a principal coach perspective, like I mentioned before, we've been very specific in terms of lining support affinity-wise, because that was an ask specifically for our Black principals. And so that was a support piece as well. But I just wanted to highlight, because that's a piece in terms of supports, given our relatively new group of principals, which we're expecting to keep and stay. Also, I want to note this last bullet in regards to our leadership model this year. So like I mentioned earlier, leadership is where we bring all the principals together. So during this time, so everything about support for our leaders of color. So we do affinity space during this time, which is important, which is something that from a feedback perspective, and we collect feedback after every session, which is something that they've appreciated. We're also engaging and coming back to racial equity work from a baseline perspective, because we know how important that piece is. Collectively as a whole group. And then when we do that type of work, then that gives us an opportunity to differentiate within affinity space. The PD advisory group also gives, which is another feedback loop, gives us feedback from a leadership steering committee on what supports are needed during leadership development, specifically during Leadership Institute. So I just wanted to highlight a few things on this page.
And there's some of these things, that we're addressing with these leadership, with the professional leadership and learning, is some of the things that, like one of the themes is characteristics of white dominant culture.
Yes.
Is some of those things getting addressed?
Yes.
And how is it getting addressed, and what measures are we going to
Yeah, so what
know that it's being addressed?
Yeah, so a big piece with that part is engaging in racial equity work together as a whole group of so last year we had we called it white accountability space, and then we had affinity space. The feedback from last year, from our leaders of color specifically, they wanted to engage collectively as an entire group from a racial equity perspective. So in terms of addressing kind of that theme, white dominant culture, so to speak, and engaging in those collective conversations and activities together is something that we're working on this year, based on the feedback last year. Because one of the things that we find too as leaders of color, a lot of times when you're in the building, you find that like if a racial incident occurs or if something else occurs, there's this feeling like because you are the person of color or the leader of color, that you are the one, right? Like people always will go to you and ask questions, well, what do you think in regards to this? And that's an added burden, right, that folks feel. And so when we can engage collectively, more so in this work, and get to a level of understanding, it can't be all on our administrators of color. This is our collective work together. And it's by no fault or harm that people don't want. That white fragility, in a sense, kind of comes into play. And leading to situations like that, which in turn then lead to, again, this feeling of just not supported, right, in the work.
And out of those meetings, out of those collaborations, what outcomes have we had from those?
Outcomes in terms of what?
Like, what are some of the sentiments of how things can change? What are some of the conclusions that they come out and they meet together?
Still kind of early to tell from a feedback perspective, but we'll know more after the end of this year. We also do like I said, we do feedback after every leadership session. But from our first session that we initially had, people appreciated the time together collectively as a whole. We did an activity in August around identity, right? And just being comfortable sharing who you are, and what you believe, and all that, learn about each other collectively as a group, administrators of color, everybody, right? And people appreciated that level of opportunity to do those types of things.
I know, I'm sure you know this as well as everyone here. When you have those, it's one thing to have the action, right? It's one thing to have the groups, it's one thing to talk about it. The important thing is also having some action behind it. Like, what did that look like? Systematically, what did that look like? When you talk about, white dominant culture, or you talk about not support, what mechanisms are we using? What things are we talking about to address that? And what things are we putting in place to do that? It's one thing that we can talk about, racism, we can talk about it all day long, but if we don't put things together in place to address that, then they go back to these same type of feelings. It's like, oh, well, we talk about it, but nothing happens.
Yeah, and our piece, and that's where we see, so if you think about the SCIPs, which are foundational to a school success, right? The SCIPs are the plan. So the SCIPs encompass 2 academic goals and a climate and culture goal. The climate and culture goal, a lot of them center around, it could be different things, but they use the Successful School Survey, they use behavior data, right? And if you take a look at Successful School Survey, like for example, if I were to take a question from the climate and culture, like sense of belonging, like for students, is a big piece that a lot of schools hone in on, right? Because we know that if you don't have sense of belonging, there's something going on in the building from a cultural perspective. And a lot of it can stem from a lot of things, just a feeling of inclusion, implicit bias, those types of things. And so they have outlined specific steps to address that climate goal that they have in each one of their SCIPs. So those are specific actionable items. And I would also say too, that they've also utilized the ResJ department to help with even some of the tougher conversations, right? Like say around racialized incidents that happen in buildings and those types of things. And so the climate goal from each SCIP is a measurable, actionable, it's always good to have goals, but the strategies incorporated tied with data is a measurable piece that schools move forward with. And I would also say too, like the idea of what we're doing in leadership is to support the implementation of strategies on this. That was good. If we can go to the next slide, and I just want to highlight a few things here too. So I would say this too. So if you talk to building owners, a lot of times frustration maybe won't necessarily come from, say, like a senior director of schools is not being supported in that way, or I'm not getting the professional development that I want type of thing. A lot of the issues of frustration can stem from, I got this, and this to do. Who do I call, right? Like, or I have something in HR that is due, something, the piece from facilities, or I have this kind of piece. And so one of the things that we really have looked to do, not only last year, but especially this year, is to create clarity as to, because being a principal, right, is not just about being an instructional leader. It's not just being about those pieces. You have to know how to manage a building, and you have to know how to deal with crisis, and you gotta know how to do those types of things. So who do you call, right? Who are your point to that? And so we really have tried to make some strides into increase that level of clarity, right? Of who your point person is, because there's nothing more frustrating as a former building principal, not knowing who to call number one, or I call the wrong person, and that person sends me on a different wild goose chase to find what my answer is gonna be, right? And so that's a piece in terms of support that we really try to hone in on, in terms of clarity of point people and also clarity of roles. And it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention, I did mention this already before, but it's significant in terms of our caseloads for senior directors of schools. You know, last year, we had one senior director of schools who had 18 schools. And that's really hard to provide the level of support usually for building leaders. And so honing in on that and making some decisions so that we can have manageable loads for our senior directors, because they're not just principal supervisors, right? They are principal coaches in a sense as well. So that's important. Also, Peter and I talked about this too, just a little bit, but efficacy with the entire central office department. So when you can have a cohort of schools and a representative from, say, the Office of Teaching and Learning, the Office of Student and Support Service, tied, and a principal coach tied to a specific cohort of schools, so they know who point people are in reference to those departments, that has been significant, right, moving forward. It just comes back again to that clarity of roles, who do you talk to in reference to support. I talked about the affinity group pieces. This year as well is the creation of a principal advisory committee. And the principal advisory committee is a rep from each cohort, meeting with myself and a rep from, the chief academic officer, chief of student support service, chief of facilities, and chief of HR. Monthly to gather more input and feedback on how it's going. And
So, I'm sorry,
go ahead.
specifically that advisory group is around the equity action plan?
There are pieces to that, yes, around really support. Like what does it look like going for you? How's it going? What's working? What's not? But then also be a promo practice type of group.
Sorry. Clarify, so it was specifically set up around the equity action plan, or, because I'm trying to, like, how is it, is this like PAPSA, or is it like?
This is not PAPSA, this is something separate.
But it's not specific to the equity action plan, but it has the equity action plan?
It does, because what we're talking about is support for building leaders, and with the groups with the principals who have been we're going to be on this. We have representatives. We have representatives, number one, from each cohort, from all levels, but then we also have administrators, right? And so this will give an opportunity for us to talk about how it's going specifically to the equity audit.
So it hasn't been set up yet, but
It's been set up, but we're waiting till November to actually have the first, and then we'll do those meetings monthly.
And I'm just curious, how can you utilize, is there a reason to not use PAPSA?
Why not to use PAPSA?
Yeah, just,
Well, we're using PAPSA, but we like something more than just PAPSA. Right? It's just again trying to increase avenues for feedback. That's what we're trying to do.
Dr. Proctor, I know you've been listening to the conversation. I'm not sure if you want to weigh in regarding our efforts to support our admin of color.
Yes. Thank you. So as I've, been listening in, it's important for us to note that when implementing the particular systems that we are talking about, that it takes, the effort of implementation, but also cycles of continued feedback to determine how it's working and how it's working well for our leaders of color. And I hear that as a major concern. With the efforts, they're really targeted at building those out of those themes, the sense of belonging, but also building the capacity. So it was noted that where there may be a void due to some of the themes, we are making efforts on two ends to address the specific concerns and also building the capacity of our leaders as they continue to lead through our system, so that they can definitely provide those equitable supports, and provide us the feedback necessary so that we can continue to meet those objectives that are outlined in the survey.
Dr. Walker. Last slide. And so from a leadership development perspective for Leadership Institute, just highlighting that we're really honing in on instructional leadership, racial equity, and then leading forward through change. So that's a common through line for building leader development. And that's also done in conjunction with and partnership with ResJ. It's good because our building leaders of color are not just principals, right? They're APVPs. And they're also aspiring principals. And I talked a little bit about the work of our professional leadership and learning piece. Also, we've adjusted leadership so that all our APs and VPs can attend, right? Because that was a tough piece last year. And so we've adjusted to make sure that our big leadership sessions are done on non-school days. Right? So that's a big piece where everybody can attend and participate collectively together. They still get, what they missed if they're unable to attend, because we have separate AP and VP meetings working with them, but also for the larger leaderships, having them non-student things. We have our first one, knock on wood, hopefully in November. And then align comprehensive and differentiated ResJ professional learning opportunities. So ResJ has been a huge partner with this. Into our work and support with our administrators of
color. Just a couple last questions for me. Are we using our exit surveys to get data why just not our people of color leaving? Are we gathering that data? And what we're doing with that data?
Yes, we are. The exit surveys for folks who leave. Yes, we are gathering that data. And that is a piece that we look at as the Office of School Performance, because it is a goal for every senior director of schools, right? It's a goal, retention of all administrators.
And who does the exit surveys?
It's HR.
That's a good question. So how are we going to measure success, and what should we expect at the next update that we're probably going to have in the next 3 to 6 months?
Yeah, so success ultimately at the end is retention, right? Especially retention of our leaders of color, right? That's ultimately going to be the piece that we'll look at. That's going to be a huge barometer. Like I mentioned earlier, in terms of focus groups specifically around these themes, I really like the suggestion about can we tailor some of the successful schools questions centered around these themes. I think that could be a big benchmark in regards to success. But ultimately, it is about not only how they're feeling in reference to those questions, but ultimately, are they leaving or are they staying? That's going to be a
Something I wanted to also add is that as we continue to have the conversations, continue to implement our plan and have conversations with our leaders of color to understand the impact and the results that we're getting in line to the exit surveys, that there's something that we have to that we're mindful of when it comes to the rate of change or the rate of improvement compared to the rate of the initial impact or harm. So as it was raised, some of those and many of the original leaders of color that took the survey may not be with the system any longer, but that kind of reinforces why we need to take these particular steps to ensure that we are, as we acquire and hire through our pipeline, more administrators of color, how we are able to support them and provide the level of care necessary for them to feel successful and feel supported in their role is going to really determine the rate that we're able to make the change needed to have a sustained experience for our leaders.
I have a question. I'm just curious, how many of the leaders come from Portland or Oregon, and how many do we bring in from a whole nother state?
I don't know the answer to that.
It's a majority.
I could ask it another way.
Yeah,
Or from the region?
I would say they're all in the metro.
We would name the district, but we don't want to make them feel bad.
Yeah.
So I'm
I
just,
was just wondering if part of the problem might be just a whole different culture, but it's not. So
They're from surrounding districts, mostly.
it's a small point, and it's a little bit of a pet peeve, like you said, talked about retention. I would encourage us to think more broadly than retention. I always think of retention as a little bit, again, sort of limiting for a couple of reasons. Sometimes, when we've provided a really good professional experience for someone and that administrator gets an opportunity to become a deputy superintendent in another district, that's a positive thing, that's a good reason why they left, and we should be proud of that. Other times we have poor performing leaders of color, leaders that are, white leaders as well. We want to be able to move those people through our system and out. So I would, but every one of our good performing administrators of color, we want to retain.
And that's
So for me, I would focus it, and then I'd be a little more broad on saying what's the experience that our leaders are having. So even if they stay,
Exactly.
correct.
but they're having a bad experience, like we want to fix that as well.
Correct.
I think Director Scott captures one of my philosophy in this regard because, to answer the question, over time, our administrators of color should be reporting that it feels like a more inclusive, positive experience to work in the district at all levels. And so we want to be able to query for that, in different ways, not just a survey. You want to hear from them directly. You want to have groups. You want to have them say, here's what's feeling better, here's what's not. As leaders of color in this room, they could share with you their experience too. And what does support look like, and what creates that kind of climate and culture where folks would be themselves, their best selves, within a diverse school system. So, that's what we really want. We want them to, be content doing the hard, challenging work here in the district to lift up our students of color in particular. This is why we've really focused on the equity-centered leadership, because every leader needs to do that, regardless of color or background they bring to the equation.
Agreed. All right. That's it.
That's it. It didn't seem like that.
Any other questions, comments? All right, means adjourned. Next regular meeting of the board will be November.